let me get started with a short introduction about Amplify MedTech. I am Famida Kapadia. I am the founder of Amplify MedTech. I've spent the last 15, 20 years of my career working with MedTech startups, and I really enjoy working in this space. And Amplify MedTech was my brainchild to create more support and a more vibrant medtech ecosystem. Our mission is basically to establish a collaborative medtech ecosystem by sharing resources, networking amongst all the ecosystem stakeholders in the region so that we can create a vibrant, sustainable, and locally engaged medtech community that will stimulate economic growth. In the last 1 year, we have supported the ecosystem with educational programming, with workshops, and with networking events. And we have a lot of exciting things planned for 2026, which will be rolling out very shortly. So please follow us to stay up to date with all the updates. As we mentioned, we support the entire medtech ecosystem because our vision is to create collaborations, to create those impactful collisions that are very important and necessary to support the growth of medtech companies. So whether you're a medtech startup or an entrepreneurial service provider or a medtech expert or an inventor or an academic organization, everyone needs to be able to work together in order for us to make the meaningful impacts that we want to create. We create impact by unifying the ecosystem, enhancing collaborations, facilitating resource to accesses, engaging with the community, which will create sustainable economic growth. Our next and last event for this year is going to be our anniversary celebration on December 2nd. It will be at I-270 Labs in Frederick. And if you can join us, we would love to have you be present so that we can all celebrate together this 1 year milestone. We are very active on LinkedIn. So if you're not following us on LinkedIn, please do follow us so that you can keep up to date. If you want to share events, if you want to share stories, if you want us to, if there are milestones that you want to celebrate, we want to celebrate those with you. So please send those news to us. Please send those updates to us. And we would be very, very happy to amplify that for you. With that, I would like to now welcome our extremely prestigious panel today. We have Julie Wilkinson, we have Caroline Popper, and we have the wonderful Ellington West, who is going to be talking about all things AI and MedTech today with us. So, can we start off maybe with a round of introductions? And Julie, can you kick us off?
Sure thing. Nice to see everybody, and very happy to be part of this Amplify MedTech group, a much needed thing in our area in the DMV space. I have been in medical devices, mainly diagnostics, for about 35 years in industry once I left academia and started bench work, scientist. That's the way I think and the way I do things, but then had opportunity to learn more of the business, to branch out beyond the science and everything. But at core, it's about product development. How do you develop something that the FDA will like and approve, and that you will be able to manufacture and make money, and that will help humanity, right? We want to be able to do all of these things. And if you don't design and develop the product the right way, it won't last. So that's kind of my whole space. I've been worked from giant workhorse systems that are in clinical labs that run thousands and thousands of samples a day, down to over-the-counter single-use diagnostic tests. And a lot lately, as all of this AI and everything is more in the digital health space of how do we kind of marry the digital tools that we have with improving access to healthcare, but then also the impact of healthcare on everybody and on our lives and making everything better. So that's kind of how this whole thing has come about. So that's what I do.
Welcome, Julie. Thank you for that wonderful
Yeah.
introduction. Caroline.
Yeah, well, thank you, Famida, for putting this together. Delighted to meet everybody. Delighted to have Julie and Ellington as friends. I am originally a physician, internist, and pathologist. Had a career in the medical device industry for public companies, private companies, four of my own companies, and now very involved in strategy for companies and businesses like people on this call are involved in. My career has recently taken, I would say, a slightly different route, driven in fact by AI or the potential of AI in medical technology. So recognizing that, particularly as a former pathologist, recognizing the opportunity that machine-driven or AI-first technology can bring to pathology, I decided that we were on the threshold of some kind of industrial revolution in healthcare, where in the future, healthcare will be delivered by a combination or teaming of human and AI-driven machines. And I thought in order to enable that, I needed to become a lawyer because we need to understand how to validate the non-humans, how to regulate the non-humans, how to credential and certify the non-humans, and how to share risk and liability between all the stakeholders in order to drive adoption. Because we all agree that adoption will improve quality, reduce cost, enable access. So that's why I'm here, and I really love this topic. So thanks for the opportunity.
Welcome, Caroline. And last but not the least, Ellington West.
Thank you all so much. It's such an honor to be here. Of course, the CEO of an acoustic-based diagnostic company is having acoustic issues today. So I'm on both my phone and this computer, but we're doing a blend and we're here. I am so honored to be here. These women are incredible. And I think that we've already decided that we're creating some type of coalition together. We haven't defined it yet, but the power right now on this panel is incredible. I'm also so honored to see familiar faces like Selena, another Hopkins spin out, showing up and being here and being present. So as mentioned, my name is Ellington West. I'm the CEO and founder of Synavi Labs. We are a medical device and software company that's really focused on harnessing the power of AI to transform the way we detect, diagnose, and manage respiratory diseases. I started this company about 8.5 years ago in a world where AI adoption was really not at the forefront of anyone's mind. And what we worked really hard on in our ability to survive and our ability to take something from the university that was just a concept to commercialize it, to get the patents, to get the regulatory approval, and ultimately to launch this project has been one of the greatest journeys of my life thus far. And I'm excited to share on my experiences and what I've learned along the way and what my hopes are and what everyone in this community can really be at the forefront of. So in addition to having my medical device and software company, I'm also the co-owner and operator of Harbor Designs and Manufacturing, where we do from prototype to commercialization in hardware, really focusing on how to get ideas into the hands of the people that need it the most. But we recognize that that's not possible without folks who truly understand the market, understand the challenges that we face when it comes to adoption. And that really is the difference between a great idea and a successful idea. So excited to
Very
chat.
well said, Ellington. Let's start with the most basic question, which is what is on top of your mind when you think about AI in medtech today? What do you spend most of your time thinking about? Caroline, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, I think about the need for good validation data. just as we would use with any other innovation in healthcare. So I think at the end of the day, we need to understand what the current patient journey is, what the patient journey becomes with the intervention that we are proposing. We need to talk about it, publish on it, and make a case for the use of that AI-enabled MedTech as providing a superior outcome when combined with a human, or potentially a superior outcome when used alone. On the basis of that evidence, which needs to be accumulated, I believe the standard of care will change, and that will be a necessary requirement to really open the market and drive adoption.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts, Julie? What keeps you up at night?
Well, in addition to being like paranoid about validation and verification, I I think with AI we have to what concerns me is getting ahead of our skis and like you need to think far, but you need to plan near. And so getting the design right and getting, what are the requirements? Who are the stakeholders? What are each of their requirements so that we can build and design it so that it will be useful to everyone? Um, because right now you're getting very fragmented. Well, regulatory, oh, reimbursement, and oh, the user, and um, but we need to look at all of them. And so my concern is we just don't want to get too far ahead on one segment without considering all the other stakeholders. So,
Wonderful. Excellent. That's such an important point. We have to take everything into consideration
mm,
and not get too ahead of ourselves because, as we know, literally every day I listen to a new podcast and there is a new introduction in the market
yeah,
around some AI technology, right?
yeah.
And it's very easy to be there, is to start getting ahead of ourselves and trying to keep up with this AI race that's going on. So very, very valid points, Judy. Ellington, what are some of your major considerations?
I think what keeps me up at night is the fear around the perpetuating of existing health disparities. We have such an opportunity to make this time about true access and improvement in a meaningful way, but it comes down to the intentionality of leadership and teams and the type of data that they're collecting, who they are including at the table. And so for me, it becomes this very urgent matter that if we are not being intentional about who we are focusing on, what patients and who we are bringing to the table, we are going to just create an even wider gap. And so that's something we've been very intentional about here at Sanofi, but also something that even just from an ethical component, it is really keeping me up at night because it isn't a priority to a lot of leaders. It's more, how can we be there first? And you compromise a lot to be first and not inclusive. So that's something that I really am spending a lot of time and energy in trying to find solutions around, but something that I'm very fearful of.
Famita, can I have a second
Oh,
shot at it?
please, please.
In terms of the keeping up at night part, I think we're in an area and a time in history where guidance from the FDA is unavailable. In other words, there are small pieces of guidance, but there is not a proactive FDA regulatory scheme in place. I'm talking about today. And the rate of change is fast that it's not really comforting to think that in 2, 3 years it will be in place. That's kind of late for some of us. So I think what keeps me up at night is thinking where the guardrails or who will put the guardrails in place. And so I think we have to be much more thoughtful and creative about where we might see these coming from. And I think we might be talking to a different audience. So whereas we would normally talk to or prepare to talk to the FDA, we might be talking to CIOs of major health systems. There will be different stakeholders kind of filling the breach left by the sort of abdication of the federal stakeholder at this precise moment in time.
Absolutely. And Caroline, in the world of AI, 2 or 3 years is like 2 or 3 decades, right?
Exactly. That's why I think right now we might be talking to those CIOs because they can't wait for some guidance documents in 2028.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so we have to be very mindful of putting together the guardrails as we are building this.
Exactly.
And not treat it as a wild, wild west and, be very mindful about it. So, Caroline, as a follow up, where do you see the biggest bottlenecks between an AI proof of concept idea and a product that buyers will actually adopt? You mentioned one of them, which is, FDA, but as we said, FDA guidelines are very few and far in between. So, what are some of the bottlenecks that you see as startups are working on taking these ideas to market?
I think it's where we started with the generation of data, the generation of evidence, the recognition of that evidence by peer-reviewed literature or professional organizations that then becomes integrated into guidelines and that drives adoption.
Okay.
So a beautiful example would be that machines read OCT images of the retina better when humans combine with machines, the outcome is better. Evidence published, peer-reviewed, etc. I think that then starts to become the standard of care, and no one will be wanting to just use a human read, because the thing about AI is that it can be cost effectively disseminated. And to Ellington's point, cost of access is no longer a barrier to access. It's not like buy another MRI machine. It's more easily accessed. And so I think that facilitates adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. Human in the loop is very important. AI is not a standalone, it's a tool, and
At
making
least at
sure.
this time.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And Anton, you've been there, you've done that, you've taken a product to market, and you were way ahead of the curve. You were working with AI before AI was the cool dude. Uh, so tell us a little bit about your journey to market, right? What were some of the biggest risks and challenges that you encountered?
Yes, I think that one of the things that we learned very early on is the value of having every stakeholder at the table when you're really trying to make something come to life, and that it requires adoption from so many folks. So for us, and I think that it's been said and will be said time and time again, is that at this time and in this moment, provider or human in the loop is essential for success and for adoption. There are just too many gaps in what we're looking at and where we are. And it's about trust, right? So now, just because everybody understands and has ChatGPT doing all of their work, they don't, right? They still are a little reserved and hesitant when it comes to, and appropriately a matter of healthcare, right? And when we cross into this clinical market, what we very quickly had to realize is that physicians are stubborn and they want it their way. And frankly, they believe that they are the best in everything. And so we had to just kind of lean into, whether this is true or not, I don't know, know, but I'll just give you a small fact. So when someone's utilizing their stethoscope and auscultating and listening to your heart, listening to your lungs, the physicians only agree 70% of the time on what it is that they're hearing. But moreover, and Caroline and I have discussed this multiple times, and she's a former physician, that really it's just become, the stethoscope has become an accessory. No, but it is the most widely used diagnostic tool, whether that's for show or clinical practicality. There's really a gap here, and now it's just essentially a placebo. But there is so much value that you can gain and gather from really looking at a patient comprehensively. So what we realized at the time was that a few things had to happen. One, we had to have physicians on board understanding that we weren't threatening the work that they were doing. Our goal was just to help empower them to be better, to be faster, and to become more accurate. We knew that we had to publish extensively because our job was to gain their respect and for them to say that there is a path forward here. And then the third piece was really about our patient engagement, understanding what will allow a patient to feel comfortable, to adhere. And adherence is still a challenge for us, right? That even though we know what the patient is able to gain, it requires community health workers, it requires push notifications, it requires relentless engagement for our patients to show up the way that they need to. And it is difficult when you have these, 2 to 3 different variables that are always in flux and that there's tension around. And so our job is always to figure out how to reduce that tension and make it easier for everyone to work together. And I had shared, I think I was speaking with someone earlier today, that 3 things also had to happen for us to be successful in this space. It was like an act of God, because 8 years later, and everyone who's gone through regulatory and rigorous testing understands that this is a long road, right? 7 to 10 years before you're really ready to hit the ground running in a meaningful way. And for us, when we first started the company, everyone was asking, well, I guess respiratory health is important, but we'd really love to see you focusing on cardiovascular. And we're like, okay, but everyone also has lungs and everyone's breathing. But the COVID had to happen, right? For people to say, well, wait a second, let me shift in the way that this is happening. And then because of COVID, there was the telehealth and remote patient monitoring infrastructure that very rapidly had to be developed, because we realized we were so behind the curve on this, but it needed to happen in order to reach patients in places that were not accessible before. And then the last thing was open AI, really giving people access to understanding what AI means to them and how it can be applied on a daily basis. So these 3 things really had to happen. And I say this because my background is in market research, and we thought that we had figured it out, but I am telling you that these 3 acts of God had to exist in order for us to really move this forward in a meaningful way.
So, for those of us in the audience who don't know exactly what the Felix does, can you tell us a little bit?
Absolutely. I'm happy to. So, and I'll just give you a little bit of background. So about 8 years ago, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was focusing on a grand challenge, and it was around pediatric pneumonia. There was one child under the age of 5 dying every 36 seconds worldwide from pneumonia. Pneumonia is detectable. Pneumonia is treatable. But the issue was that there were community health workers all over the globe that were able to have access to these patients, but they were not trained to make the clinical determination of what needed to happen next for that patient. And so the team at Hopkins was tapped to say, we know that you have acousticians and AI ML folks, and let's just challenge the world's brightest and best to see if we can get to the bottom of this issue. And so just a little bit of background. So the technology was licensed out of my father's lab. My father is an inventor. He invented the electret microphone. It's the microphone in all cell phones and microphones in the world. So we're very acoustic based. And so when he recognized that he could change entertainment and the way that we communicate, the real task was, how do we improve humanity as a result of this wonderful technology? And so the thought was, okay, well, if a physician uses a stethoscope to listen to the sound of your heart and your lungs, can we take those acoustic signals and sounds and train algorithms to identify those same and similar abnormalities? And what we were able to do specifically with pneumonia was to be able to identify it in pediatrics with the same, if not higher, higher accuracy than both an X-ray and a trained physician's ear. Our standard, gold standard, was comparing it to X-ray, because also, as Caroline had said earlier, this is the Wild West when it comes to the FDA. No one, I mean, the pulmonologist and the leadership was just perplexed by how this could even be something that would be possible. And that's also where we need to speed things up to meet technology where it's ready to be. But so the device is kind of like a Shazam for your body. It's listening, or if you ever say, "Hey Siri, name that tune," we're doing the same thing for your body. We have an array of 8 microphones on the bottom. It allows you to safely and place the device, because the physician is usually looking for that sweet spot. We reduce the sensitivity for placement, so anyone basically with a 4th grade education or above has the ability to utilize the device. Again, going back to our mission around accessibility. But the device listens to the sound of your heart, listens to the sound of your lungs, pings that to our cloud, and then we're looking for abnormalities, which we define as crackle, wheeze, rhonchi, and we grade the severity of your wheezes or your crackles based on the power of that sound. So essentially, we recreated the human cochlear model. So the way that your brain processes sound is exactly what we're doing, but we also do it with a spectrogram that allows us to do it both visually and from an auditory standpoint. So it's been a wonderful small tool that allows anyone anywhere to essentially have a doctor in their pocket. But again, we're very focused on how do we just share this data with care teams and providers from anywhere so that they can help us make the best next decision. The ultimate expression of this technology will be for us to really rely on Felix to triage, but we're just not there yet, and we're comfortable not being there yet because we don't think that our patients or providers are ready to be there yet either.
Yes, absolutely. And what a wonderful invention, right? Like, we take the most basic device that every doctor uses and reimagine it to do more, to do better. So congratulations on that. Julie, since in the diagnostics and IVD space, how is AI changing the landscape? What are some of the trends that you are seeing that you are very optimistic about?
Well, so I think in general, any of this forward progress is optimistic and wonderful. So I see there's 2 different ways of AI fitting into this space. One is for diagnostic developers to use AI as a tool, right? To help design, to help validate, to be able to pull together vast amounts of data as you go through product development. So I think that just there is very a simple, straightforward. You validate the models. We've been using Microsoft Excel for decades now, and everybody trusts that. So this is, a next step in really pulling it together. The other part is actually using AI as a way to design your diagnostic, right? So that's kind of a different thing of almost identifying a need in the community and coming up with what would be a useful diagnostic tool, right? So I would envision that at some point it would say, we need to call Ellington and we need to say, a stethoscope kind of thing that could be telehealth done and accessible worldwide is a huge need. Or actually, the need would be to transfer all of that information seamlessly and efficiently. So that's another way, is to have AI kind of help us identify a need so that then we go out and we can validate it, right? And then AI is the diagnostic device. So, and that's been in for a while with imaging, with pathology, with, reading those kinds of things. I think the first was like a retinal scan. And that's the tricky bit. And I think that's what Caroline and Ellington have been referring to, of now we're dealing with trust. We're dealing with human in the loop. We're dealing with a lot more regulation that everybody needs to feel comfortable with. And also there's a lot of money here. And so I think intellectual property is right? I know there are legal firms really wrestling with how how to protect, how to uh, make it a worthwhile endeavor. Because as startup companies, without any kind of IP, you're not worth anything, right? And so working through, is it my database of data? Okay, is it just my secret sauce way of doing things? I mean, how do I protect these kind of things? And so it's a critical thing to be thinking of IP and your where you're getting your information. So if you're using it to reach out to the web and everybody and pull in information, how do you validate that? How do you know that's worth anything? How do you know it's available, not copyrighted? How do you? I mean, it's do I go out there or do I generate my own? Right, where I'm in control, I know what it is. It's curated. It's good. So this isn't consumer play. We're not using this on our phone to draw a political cartoon. Not that I did that, but some might. Um, and what we're talking about people's lives and diagnosing them and being able to pull it together. So I think just realizing the impact and the care that we have to take. Um, and I agree with this. We're going to be kind of self-policing our industry because FDA, they are slow, and I'm okay with that because I know what they're doing. I know they've got our back, and they're making darn sure that things are, performing and stuff. And so I think it's just critical for us to be self-policing as we help the FDA, right? As we help our regulators. There have been almost every month a listening session and that FDA is holding for public input, for manufacturers' inputs, because they want to hear from us. What are we doing? What do we think is important? So we can't stand back and say, well, FDA is not doing anything because we're part of it, right? We're part of helping create that solution. And so that's kind of
Yeah.
how I see things.
Yeah, no, that's very well said, right? Like we are partners with the FDA. And in our last session that we had, we talked about navigating the FDA maze. And the overwhelming message was FDA is your partner, right? You need to treat FDA as your partner. But the other point that you mentioned, Julie, is also so important. If as a startup, your source of data is going to be the internet, then how will you compete with the chat GPTs and the Geminis of the world, right? So that kind of brings me to my next question. And Ellington and I had like a conversation on this a few days ago, is how do you compete? How do you, as a startup that is building something in AI, compete with the behemoths like ChatGPT and Gemini and Copilot, which have decades and decades of data? Ellington, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a very unique experience in starting our company because of the initial support that we had from the Gates Foundation. It allowed us to develop one of the largest privately held pediatric respiratory databases in the world, where we collected data on 6 of the 7 continents. We also did collect some data in Antarctica, but it was just like we just wanted to check some boxes. It wasn't extensive. But what I will say is that there are a couple of things that are really important, and it's about the integrity of your data. It's about the collaborations that you're able to make. For us, we always believe in outsourcing until we can insource and be sustainable on our own. And that meant collaborations and partnerships with other universities and other labs. And it's about the beauty that you can translate from the academic space into your commercial or space or your company, is to keep that need to always collaborate, to recognize that the only way to beat the giant is to join all of the little teammates up and say, how do we work on this together? And we've been able to do that with partners in California, in Poland, in Brazil, in Peru, and working also with their governments and saying, listen, if we are committed to one singular mission, trust us as your partner and we'll trust you and we can build something together. So there were a lot of joint ventures that we engaged in, a lot of foundations that we targeted and wanted to work with. Because when you have a similar problem and you're all committed around that mission, it really does remove, again, that friction and tension and allow you to run faster together. Also, Julie had mentioned something that I think is really interesting around IP and just how you're looking at it, especially right now. So we have 9 patents that we worked very hard to get, and we were doing it before this kind of AI bubble happened. But something that I'm learning as we go, and we have our patents for the next 11 years because what we did was we kind of parsed it out. We wanted to go slow because we knew that the more we could delay it, the better off we would be when the world kind of caught up with the work that we were doing. But as you're pursuing this IP space, you have to have the best attorneys. And I'm so glad that this is Caroline's new kind of entree because we need you. Because the reality is that the models that we were using 2 years ago, if we were doing CNN, now what? Where are you and where do you stand? And I think that it takes people like Julie, people like Caroline, just to be at the table with you when you're making these really important decisions and making sure that you're identifying the right partners, because we can't know everything. And we have to be able to trust the leadership and the domain experts that really can see what's on the horizon. And so it's about protecting yourself, protecting your data. I believe cultivating your own and doing that through collaboration and partnership, but under extreme guidance, because we're all great at something, but we're not great at everything. And you need to have the teams behind you to ensure your success.
Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. That's your message, right, Ellington?
Yes, until I die. Yeah.
Caroline, since you've been on the on both sides, you're a physician, you're an innovator, you're also an expert. When we think about AI, what level of explainability do you think physicians want or clinicians want? How much do they want to know how AI is thinking? And do they want to know all the details, or do you think high accuracy is enough? How do startups find that balance?
But yeah, that's a fabulous question, say for a thesis or something. But I think that it depends. I don't actually think they require it to be completely explicable, but they require more insight than the black box. When physicians use a lab result, they don't know exactly how the mass spec machine works, but they have come to trust the performance of the instrument. They know it's regulated, validated, and regulated, and they're probably comfortable that it comes from a brand that has achieved some sort of brand equity. So they are therefore comfortable. The problem here is that they weren't trained in it, and I say so mindful of the fact that I finished medical school before the genome was fully elucidated. So there are many, many physicians that, anybody that graduated 10 years ago has not necessarily been exposed to any of this AI. So I believe the black box approach will retard adoption. So I do believe that there needs to be some level of explainability, both to the physician and to the patient, increasingly to the patient as they're involved in generating some of this information. And they need to provide meaningful consent if the AI is driving a semi-autonomous medical device that's operating on them. But I don't believe that all the nits and grits need to be understood by the physician. I like the term that some people use, which is reskilling. The physician or the human provider needs to be reskilled to confidently operate or perform alongside the AI-driven non-human provider. That requires some level of reskilling. I also think that it requires some level of risk sharing. So if the physician has no insight into what this AI-driven medical device is doing, the physician is going to be unwilling, simply because they're theoretically in the loop, to assume all the risk and all the liability. So I think one needs to think about risk, trust. Trust got a lot to do with brand, and explainability and liability all at the same time, and find a happy balance between all of that.
Right.
If I could just by extension go back to something we were talking about before, even when the FDA decides to regulate, we're talking about tools that learn. Just like humans, they both learn and they unlearn and deteriorate. And the FDA is not accustomed to things that change. The FDA likes things that you lock and submit for their regulation. So I think we need to think through with all our products how we provide users with mechanisms to audit and see how the device is learning, and audit and make sure that it's not deteriorating.
Right. Such important points and such valuable points, Caroline. And so I want to follow up with that on how, Ellington, when you went in front of the FDA with the Felix, how did you approach the regulatory approval for the AI piece, right? There is the hardware and there is the AI. And what was your approach to gaining regulatory approval to ensuring that FDA understood that the AI model is going to continue developing?
Oh my gosh, the number of pre-sub meetings that we had were just, I mean, it took years of just pre-sub meetings, and it was one of the hardest experiences of our lives for two reasons. One, our strategy was to decouple the hardware from the software, because we knew that from an investor lens, they needed to see a milestone met. They needed things to be de-risked, and we were kind of tricking them. So they thought that through this 510K of the hardware, we're like, and then it'll be so easy. We'll just get it right over that hump. But my gosh, what was hard? The hardest part was the distance between existing physicians' understanding and capacity to understand diagnostics in general and where we were. There was nothing. So the amount of comparison testing that we had to do, and with pediatric patients, was overwhelming. It was compared to x-ray adjudication panels. It was compared to sputum tests. It was like, there was nothing. They wanted us to take chunks out of pediatric lungs, and we're like, we're not doing that. You just need to come. This works. It was so difficult. And I think that the truth was that you just never know who or what you're walking into, and your job is to build the strongest and best case that you can. And the evidence matters more than anything, and it is all that you will ever have, because when they are behind a door and in a vacuum and they're making these final decisions, and we had, I mean, world experts on in every meeting, and it was still kicking the can, needing more evidence, needing more data. And so I think that decoupling is important if that is something. And also, things have changed now. The predicates that exist are beautiful, and that I commend the people that really were the leaders in this space, because what they had to go through has been and is unmatched, and it now allows us to operate in this space. But all I can tell you is that it felt impossible many times, and we didn't think that we were going to get there, and we still now are indication based. So we believed that we needed to focus specifically on a pneumonia diagnostic, then a crackle identifier. So there were all of these different nuances. We couldn't go in with the kitchen sink, and that goes back to the explainability, because they needed to know, how are these models changing, where is the consistency? And I think that there's still a lot of fear, and there are still a lot of questions.
Right, absolutely. And you're right. Like, even currently, some of the startups that I know who have both a hardware and an AI piece are using the decoupling route to get through FDA approval. And that will probably be the norm for a little bit before FDA figures out how to do the regulation of both hardware and software together. We are getting close to time. So I wanted to touch on one most important question around reimbursement. How are payers thinking about AI? As startups are building technologies, do they have to think about reimbursement differently than a traditional medtech company would have? And if yes, what are the reimbursement pathways that companies should be considering?
Let me just start with reimbursement is at the recommendation of the American Medical Association. So
Right.
the AMA is the one who kind of puts a code to it and says yes. And then CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, are the ones who kind of go from there. Then, once that's all approved, then the private insurers get to decide whether they're going to pay for it or not. And reimbursement is always based on their clinical utility, right? Does this make a difference? Does it change the care or outcome for a patient? So I don't anticipate that, at least as I think about it, I'm not a reimbursement specialist and I'm not a regulatory person, but it still comes down to, is it making a difference? And if it is the same as another one, okay, that's all right too. But now you're in competition to have the payers pay. They'll say, well, we got 5 of them that do that. We're not going to pay for yours. But it's really about the medical of what is it doing? Is there a utility? And well, yeah, that's just from my point of view of what I see as most critical. But I will leave it up to Ellington, who's been most recently down the path and still on the path, and Carolyn's passed.
So I'll just say, as a prelude to Ellington, I think the key thing to understand is, how does your thing fit into the patient journey, i.e., impact care? What is the total cost of that journey without your intervention? And then believe that you can make a case for part of that total cost. In other words, to key in on something that Ellington said, I don't believe that the market will tolerate the total cost of the journey going up. So I think it is, even for potentially superior outcome. So I think it's really good to understand the envelope in which you're going to work, what part of the envelope you can legitimately claim, either by substituting or simplifying or whatever, and then make a case for that, either with existing codes if you can find them, or some other mechanism. But I think you have to understand the numbers yourself, as opposed to understand CPT coding. So that's, I would say, get a good grasp on the total cost of an episode of care of the type you're going to impact. Ellington.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. It is all about going back to that notion of the evidence matters. You have to know your business better than they do, and what it is that you are saving them. Is it improved outcomes? What is valuable? What are their metrics? And how does your solution align with their bottom line? That is all that matters. They don't care. And that was what was heartbreaking to me. I'm walking into a room and I'm like, but we can save lives. We can improve outcomes. Show me how. Show me and tell me how much, and tell me how long it's going to take. And that's why, and everyone hates it. We're part of MedTech Innovator, and we did the whole thing because for us, it was all about, this pilot to scale, building evidence within these systems matters the most. And again, that goes back to that collaboration notion of, tell me what you're underwriting and what your biggest challenges are, and then let me think about how I can fit my solution into that ecosystem. And also have honest conversations with yourself, because sometimes this isn't your patient population. This isn't going to be your answer. For us, it's value-based care models. We will win there every time, but we had to learn that. And when I tell you that it was conversation and pilot after pilot, and some succeeded. And the ones that failed, it's where we learn the most about what wasn't working in our solution. But it's just, it takes that patience and understanding. But again, surrounding yourself with people who are honestly speaking a different language. There's just this vernacular and understanding that is not commonplace, I think, to so many founders, technical founders or clinical founders. And so it's about finding those folks that can help translate your solution into a perfect match to their KPIs and what they're being held accountable for. That's our journey.
Excellent. Excellent. Finding those, surround yourself with the right people who are going to help you with getting your products to market. So Alistair has a question. Alistair, would you like to ask that question or would you like me to read it?
Yeah, this goes back a little bit to something that Carolyn, you said that that Ellington, you touched on just about design freeze. So we're talking about diagnostics, but it's more generally true for devices. The idea that the FDA classically wants to see a design freeze early on before the discussions really begin. And Ellington, you talked about separating it into hardware and software. Design conceptually, a hardware design freeze is easy to visualize. I have a hard time visualizing in an AI with AI driven software, AI driven performance or controls. Is a software design freeze even possible or tractable? Given that you're going into the cloud, working to an AI, well, I'll call it a black box. That black box is constantly evolving and changing. How do you and how do regulators look at this concept of design freeze?
I can just touch on my own experience. For us, it was about methods, So it was less about this ever changing because, we have all of this. Well, there are two things that really were important. The first is the way in which our data was collected, how we're measuring that, and kind of the integrity of it. That was a big validation piece. Was we were collecting on our device, we knew what we were measuring, and we were able to control variables. And it was really about the sensitivity and specificity that we were getting out of the reoccurring success of our models, that it's never going to be 100% and it's never going to stop. But if we can agree on the methods that we're utilizing in data collection, but in also our own, like at the time, utilizing our convolutional, network, that's what was documented. That's what we would freeze, with the understanding that the data will always be pouring into these systems. And, I don't know if that's the right answer. I don't know if that is what will be in perpetuity utilized for the consideration of a software freeze. But right now, it's more about the model and the methodology over the ever-changing exposure to data.
So I guess the implication there is that AIs are maybe they'll stay the same or maybe they'll get better, but they won't get worse.
That's the hope, right? But it's such an unpredictable space. And I think that that's where the stress from regulators are really coming in, right?
Exactly.
It's so undefined right now.
Yeah, I don't think that we can. I mean, I'm happy you picked up on the point, because I absolutely agree with Ellington that we hope that they learn, and by learning they get better. But there is the potential that they deteriorate. And so just like in a conventional diagnostic, you have controls. I believe that we need to develop a process that goes along with products that allows an entity, and I'm not saying, and potentially the entity where the tool is deployed, to audit it and see how it is performing. So a kind of a control mechanism, but we should take responsibility for providing a mechanism that either documents its improvement and monitors for its deterioration. We may need to submit the improvement changes to the FDA. That's a different issue. But I think we should think about the concept of controls for those reasons with products like this.
That's almost an analogy to a phase 4 or a registry
Exactly,
trial.
exactly, exactly. post-market surveillance.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more.
Wonderful. I have one last question, if you guys don't mind staying on for a couple minutes extra. So, Kemi has a question around data monetization, which is a major concern for users in MedTech. What frameworks or safeguards should companies implement to ensure transparency, consent, and responsible data use while still creating sustainable business models?
Well, I mean, I think it's a threshold issue. And I think the ethics of AI is a major issue that we need to think about. And it's not so much a question of the model, but it's a question of the terms under which access to the data was acquired and making sure those are ethically sustainable. And then using anonymization formats in order to make sure that ensure the data integrity. And then in addition, look at the data and cybersecurity in the same sort of breath and make sure that the transmission of the data from the storage to its use or whatever is done in the most robust way. So, I mean, those seem to me the essential elements.
Let me add to that, which those are all perfect. User trust. I've been involved with a couple of digital health projects where they have run user focus groups, to try and get the input and to the design, and the engagement or the desire to engage with a digital health tool. It was like, top of mountain, bottom of mountain between my data will never leave your cloud to, I'll anonymize it. Don't worry, it'll be safe. People don't believe you that it's going to be safe and that there have been too many breaches in the world. And so that's a huge gap in trust. And it's because of the technology. We've used it as consumers, and it's almost like it's up to us to rebuild that trust. It's a challenge, right? Of how are you going to rebuild the trust? What is it going to take to get people to buy in? Because if they don't buy into this, it's not going to work. It's not going to reach those that we want it to reach. And I don't have an answer for that. I'm continuing to talk to people. I don't trust anybody, but just continuing to talk to people and find out what will it take.
And that is such an important point, right? Because the way AI got launched with ChatGPT and us being very aware of the fact that every question that we are asking ChatGPT is being used to train the model. And we don't have a say in it. We don't have a say in telling ChatGPT you can use this or you cannot use this if you're on the free version, right? And so we have started using AI in that format. And so when a healthcare company comes, the assumption will be, oh, you're going to use my data and I will not have the privacy that I demand. And so that trust building will be very, very important. So on that wonderful note, thank you, Julie, Caroline, and Ellington for such a wonderful session. I wish everyone happy Thanksgiving. We are very grateful that you took time off during your holiday week to join us today on this important topic. And we look forward to seeing you on December 2nd if you can make it.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
Karen.
You all.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Bye.